Okay, okay. All right. All right, cool. Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And just wanted to get into this quick lesson, Lord willing to be quick and straight to the point. The title is 2nd Esdras 15, Dragons of Arabia and the Carmanians, allies or foes. So as you can see on screen, this is a stream I did yesterday. Fearful headlines, worst case scenario is now unfolding. And getting towards the end of the stream, I saw that there was a question on here, but it was wrapping up. So I decided, I said in the video, I would come back and do a lesson on it. But basically, the question was, Shalom, right? Could you edify me? This is from Shabbai Yahawada 777. Could you edify me, I guess, on 2nd Esdras 15 with the dragons / Carmanians remembering their nature and how that links with Saudi Arabia in news? So through the spirit, we're going to go into it. Like I said, Lord willing, and be straight to the point, and then we can get in there. So let's start off with 2nd Esdras, the 15th chapter, and let's read the actual precept, right? So in 2nd Esdras 15, it's mainly dealing with prophecy, right? And as you get into verse 28 on down, it starts to focus more on, the prophecy of, or the vision that Ezra saw concerning World War III. And then it mentions, like when you read in Ezekiel 38, the focus there is more on Russia, right? And that angle and where they're coming from and what they're going to be doing. But in here in 2nd Esdras, you see that it mentions in here also the dragons of Arabia, right? Which is dealing with the Arab countries or nations, i.e. like the Gulf states, et cetera, et cetera. And then the Carmanians, right? Which the Carmanians go back to the Persians, which you have the Iranians today, all right, which are Persians, and they're up in the news, right? So as we see this war, all right, that's been triggered, that's going on between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, and obviously the casualties and things that are going on. Of course, there are questions concerning, like, well, how is that going to play out, and how does that relate to prophecy? So let's go into it. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 15, verse 28. And it reads, "Behold, an horrible vision, the appearance thereof from the east." Right. So this was a vision that Ezra received concerning the war that was to take place over there in the region widely known as the Middle East. Verse 29, it says, "Where the nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots." Okay, which the nations of the dragons of Arabia is dealing with these Arab countries, right? These Arab nations. And it's not just one, right? It's not just Saudi Arabia. Okay, it's those conglomerate, right? Because when you go into that word Arab, it in the Hebrew, it goes to a mixture, right? So it's really a mix of different nations in that region, predominantly being Ishmaelites. But as it says, they shall come out with many chariots, and the multitude of them shall be carried as the wind upon earth, that all they which hear them may fear and tremble. So now, keep in mind that what we are seeing in the news right now, the things that we're seeing transpire right now, this is still the early stages. Okay, right now it's not the midst of World War III. Like right now, it's not the exact things or the exact point in time that was seen in these visions, right? Because in verse 29, this is describing their armies, right? When it mentions the many chariots and it mentions the multitude of them, this is talking about them actually at the point of amassing their armies and joining together and actually engaging, all right, and joining in this war. Because remember, the Lord said that he was going to gather all of these nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat. So there's going to be a gathering. Okay, that's why it's called Armageddon or Harmageddon, mountain of troops. So there's going to be a gathering over there in that east, and at that time, you're going to have the Arab countries. They're going to join in that war, all right, with their armies and their munitions and so on. Right now, what you have going on is the Iran has been shooting missiles and using drone attacks to hit these Gulf states, but Iran has made it clear that their target is not the actual Arab countries themselves, right? They're not at war with Saudi Arabia or at war with Kuwait or Bahrain or Qatar, but the U.S. interests. Okay, the U.S. bases, the hotels where they have intelligence that U.S. troops might be in. Okay, and basically hitting even when they hit these desalination plants and so on. They're letting it be known openly that their goal isn't to make war with these Arab countries, but to hurt the U.S. Okay, and to basically cause in their defense the crippling of the interests, all right, the economic interests of not only really the West, but as widespread as this damage can go or can be, because then it will that's a part of their strategic or their strategy in terms of surviving this war. Okay, and the Arab countries, yeah, they've warned, they've come out and said, hey, they basically threw it out, right? Hey, we better stop, shooting your missiles over here. But at the same time, what you're seeing is a realization, and it's being talked about more and more of, yeah, these U.S. bases were in your countries or in your regions, but it wasn't for really your protection, right? It was really to protect Israel. And a lot of them are coming to that realization now, which is not even just the Arab countries or the Gulf states, but a lot of countries around the world that thought that, hey, we are in an alliance with the U.S. or they have our best interest in mind and X, Y, and Z. They're starting to realize that that's not really the case. It's only if you benefit the U.S.'s best interest. Okay, so anyway, verse 29 goes into the amassing, right, and the joining in of the forces, okay, of these Arab countries with their troops. Okay, that's the chariots and the multitude. Verse 30, it says here also the Carmanians. So here you have the gathering of the troops of the dragons of Arabia, and then in verse 30 you have the Carmanians, which are the Iranians, as it says, raging in wrath, shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood, and with great power shall they come and join battle with them. And it is this part, I think, the join battle with them, which it can sound a bit tricky, but all this really means is that when this war escalates to that point, because right now Iran they're shooting their missiles here, they're hitting, they're pummeling Israel, right? They're targeting certain neighboring regions, but it hasn't gotten to the point where now you have a full scale World War III on your hands. Okay, where you now have Russia in here, you have China in here and Turkey in here and so on and so forth. Okay, so the full manifestation of this hasn't come to pass yet. And what you're seeing right now in the news, this is all leading up to it, but it's not the full fulfillment of it. Okay, Iran has not amassed their troops to say, hey, come in here and let's get this ground war. They're right now they're dealing with missiles, and drones, which is a part of that great power. But that full scale war has not kicked off just yet. Okay, it's eventually going to work its way there, but you'll know once you see Russia's forces in there. You'll know once you see Turkey in there. Keep in mind that we're still at the point now where Turkey is still a part of NATO, but we know according to biblical prophecy that they're not going, like they're going to be on the side of Russia, right? They're listed in there in Ezekiel 38, right, as a part of the nations of the North quarters that are going to come with Russia. But right now, that's not the case, right? Right now, they're still a part of NATO. So there's still events that are yet to unfold as prophecy goes on, and as we see these things going on, it could die down, right? Or it could just continue to pick up. But we have to watch and see how it plays out. But just know that ultimately, as these prophecies, tread along and we measure the times diligently, you'll see how the pieces start to fall more and more and more into place, right? And we do get excited when we see the events of real life catching up to prophecy, but you can't let the excitement dilute accuracy, right? So verse 30, it says, also the Carmanians raging in wrath shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood, and with great power shall they come and join battle with them. And then it tells you here who the target is going to be, right? It says, and shall waste a portion of the land of the Assyrians. And we know here the Assyrians prophetically here is referring to Babylon, right? So it's not saying here that the target or the enemies of the Carmanians is going to be the dragons, all right? And as you read on down, it tells you in verse 31, right? And then shall the dragons have the upper hand. But if this was a war between, the Arab countries and, say, Iran, it's doubtful that the Arab countries would have the upper hand. They're realizing right now that they don't even have the backing of the U.S., okay? And Iran, the world knows, will have the backing of, or does have the backing of, Russia and also China. So they wouldn't have the upper hand against Iran if they were to actually try and engage in a full-scale war with Iran. Okay. Now, when you read in verse 30 in some of the other translations, they do word it as though it's talking about the Carmanians coming in to have war and actually wage war against the dragons of Arabia. And right now, when you see, they're bombing this area and they're bombing this area, it may seem like, oh, wow, it kind of looks like it. But remember, we're still in the early stages, and according to what we're seeing here, there is now a realization, right, which starts to go into the 31st verse. There is a eye-opening realization through these events that these Gulf states, these Arab countries, need to wake up and see that their best interest doesn't lie in support or backing from the U.S. Okay. And the adversary of the U.S., which is Russia, China, Iran, they're the ones who, if anything, these countries would have better protection with, because they're letting you know, we don't care what happens to you. As long as what we got or what we want, we get, that's it. Okay. And I'm gonna pull up some extra information on that, but just read in verse 31 as well. It says, and then shall the dragons have the upper hand, remembering their nature, which the nature, when you go back into the actual nature of the Ishmael, let's call that Ishmael, it tells you in the scriptures, right, that he will be a wild man, right? His hand will be against, basically all those around him. But it's through these sombering events that they're going to go back to that, because a lot of them have become docile and become, submissive, mainly to the Western counterpart, or I wouldn't even call them a counterpart, but through their deals and so on that they have with the West. That's why Trump can go to Saudi Arabia and they can shower him with gifts and do all this, that, and the third. But that's all going to change. And they're going to realize that, once again, your best interest doesn't lie with the U.S. They're not going to support you. And just as it says in Isaiah 13, that the Lord will stir up the Medes, which are the Russians. And just as it says in Ezekiel 38, he will put a hook into their mouth and turn them back. He is going to cause this sombering realization in the minds of these Arab countries that your enemies are not the Iranians. Your enemies are not, Russia or whoever it is around. Your enemies are not the enemies of the U.S. and Israel. It's the other way around. And it's going to get to the point where even the current allies right now of the U.S. are going to turn on her. See, so there's still a lot more pieces that need to come into place, and we have to watch how the Lord does that. We still haven't seen Turkey, what event causes Turkey, which is in NATO right now, to not be on that side anymore. Because once this war goes full scale, as France is talking about sending in, artillery, right, and naval force into that region, they're getting more and more drawn and involved in this war. So if you have France, which is a part of NATO, and they're getting involved, and this starts to escalate more and more, how is Turkey going to come on the side of Russia, them being a part of NATO? That still hasn't happened yet, and we still need to see how that plays out, right? At what point is Russia going to get drawn into this war? That still hasn't happened yet, right? And we still need to see how that plays out. So that's why I mentioned that we're still in an early part of this these prophecies concerning World War III, and we have to watch how the Lord has it play out. But what we know is when it gets to its peak, the lines will be drawn, and we'll see it very clearly. All right, who's on what side and what's going on here. All right, as it says, conspiring together in great power to persecute them. Right, and then it goes on more and more and more. I've done a breakdown on 2nd Esdras 15. Right, if you go on my channel, you just go to playlist, or even just type it in. You'll see the breakdown of the whole chapter. So I'm not going to go into the whole chapter here, but just wanted to really address 29, 30, and 31. Okay, that ultimately you are going to have their common enemy or their common target when it talks about them joining in battle. When Iran and these Arab countries, and it's not just going to be isolated to them, but once it gets to the point where they're mobilizing their armies and they're actually getting in full scale into this war, it's going to be with a common enemy in mind, which is the prophetic Assyrians, which is Babylon, okay, or America. So now I typed in here Gulf states realizing the United States is not with them, right? And this is what it says. Gulf states are experiencing intense frustration and disillusionment with the U.S. in early 2026. And you'll see, as time progresses, that even within the beast system, these horns, these countries that are part of it are going to start to also experience, if they aren't already, this frustration in looking at the carelessness of the whore, which is America, which is Babylon, and how it is pro-Israel first at the expense of its so-called allies. And they're also going to start to see, and you're going to see that frustration draw lines. You already saw tensions between Spain and the U.S., okay, which I believe, I forgot what position the individual was in Spain, but he called for Spain to leave NATO. He said, look, at this point, it's not, it's not really benefiting you. You're seeing that the U.S. will do whatever it takes for Israel and for their best interest. They don't really care much about you. So how much are you really benefiting at or versus or compared to your suffering at the expense of what they're doing? But anyway, it says here, Gulf states are experiencing intense frustration and disillusionment with the U.S. in early 2026, feeling ignored and unprotected following joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. And honestly, majority of the country, pretty much everybody did not want that. Nobody wanted war. And I mean these countries, right? Because they knew how dangerous it would be to provoke or to go and attack a country like Iran, which pretty much everybody understands it's not like Iraq, right? It's not like, the other countries that the U.S. went in there and showed some force. And then, no, Iran can inflict a lot more damage, and they've been preparing for that. So a lot of countries knew that, and they tried as best as they could to steer away from that. But guess what? The U.S., Israel said, no, we're going to do it. The U.S. said, all right, we're going to follow suit. So it says here, believing the U.S. is prioritizing its own forces and Israel over regional stability, these nations feel left to face the devastating consequences and retaliation alone. And keep in mind, where they are placed is very, it can leave them very vulnerable. Meaning now you're within range. Iran can beat you into submission, but also with their control of the Strait of Hormuz, it makes life harder for you. If you're one of these Gulf states, a lot of them are already filing for force majeure. You can look up what that means. And with those desalination plants hit, for some of these areas, I forgot which country it was that had theirs hit. I mentioned in the lesson yesterday, if you're in the desert, okay, yeah, you're surrounded, or next to you is a body of water, but that's seawater and it's salt water. And so they need, the desalination is the process of basically, if you were dealing with water, you take that salt water or that seawater, and then you remove, right, or you purify it by extracting the salt out of it so it becomes usable, for like humans, because we can't use salt water like that. You can't drink that. It's gonna kill you, okay, the more you drink it. And so that's very important for them. Water, food, that's very, very, very important for them. And majority of that is imported, okay, or it's used via these factories or these plants. So, one or two strategic strikes here and there, and they're basically being brought to the point of submission, Anyway, it says here, Key details regarding the shift: lack of communication. Gulf officials reported they were not given advance notice of the February 28th, 2026 attacks, leaving them vulnerable to retaliation. Neglected warnings. The U.S. allegedly ignored warnings from Gulf states about the severe risks to the region. So they're letting you know, look, it's all right. It's okay. You deal with it. Depleting resources. Some nations are experiencing rapidly depleting stocks of missile interceptors, highlighting their vulnerability. Strategic disconnect. A feeling exists that the U.S. is focusing on its own security and Israel's rather than the collective defense of the Gulf, undermining trust in the long-term U.S. security umbrella. Growing fear. The ongoing conflict has caused significant economic damage and instability, with Gulf nations forced to bear the brunt of the escalating situation. Now, like I said, and as Yahushua actually said, we have to watch, right? We have to watch and see how these things play out, because he did say in Matthew 24, but the end is not yet. So there's still things that need to happen, right? Which we're very, very close, but there's still pieces that need to be moved, right? There's still pieces that need to be moved. Like the examples I gave, Revelation 17 talks about the beast hating the horn. Right now, they're still on the same side, right? Right now, the MOTB still hasn't come out on prophetic levels yet. Right now, Turkey is still in NATO. Okay. Right now, Russia still hasn't officially joined the war, even though they're supporting and assisting Iran, and likewise China. So there's still more to go, right? As we see how the Lord is pulling these strings, how he's working on the minds of these kings, and what he's putting, into their thoughts in terms of what to do, how to approach the matter, and now there's talks about Israel and U.S. looking for an off ramp, even though it doesn't look like there's going to be, an easy way out of what they've gotten themselves into, or if that's just another ploy to try and push on with their next phase of the plan. But there's a lot going on, and we have to watch, right? We stick to what we know, and we watch how we get to that point. That's a part of measuring the times diligently. Remember, the prophets, they saw the climactic points of these prophecies, and we are now living into the lead up to those points. So we're going to see a lot going on, but what we know is how it's ultimately going to play out. So the next one I have here, this is dealing with the recent situations, right, where you had, the story is that Iran's missiles, right, this is the second time it's been fired into Turkish airspace and has been neutralized by NATO defense system. So here, this was March 9th. Erdogan warns Iran after missile enters Turkish airspace. It's pretty short. But it says here, Turkish president, and which Turkey does not, they don't like Israel. Okay. They don't like Israel already. So it's not, it's not something it's impossible for events to lead to, a messed up relationship between Turkey and NATO. Okay. Right now, Israel has made it clear that Turkey is another target of theirs. Okay. They've said that. Basically, like Turkey is the next Iran. So it says here, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Ankara has issued the necessary warnings to Tehran, which I believe today there was reports about him summoning, I forgot what role that person was, but it was somebody from Iran to address, right, concerning the missile, the second missile that has come into the airspace. Anyway, it says here, after NATO air defenses shot down a second Iranian ballistic missile that entered Turkish airspace earlier on Friday. Speaking after a cabinet meeting in Ankara, Erdogan said Tehran continues to take wrong and provocative steps during the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. So for somebody that doesn't know prophecy, they may look at it and say, well, Iran is shooting missiles and it's going into Turkish airspace, but aren't they supposed to be on the same side? This is just the beginning. Okay, this is just the beginning. And it's like, well, now Turkey's warning them about this, but once again, there's still things that are going to take place that are going to lead to one thing leading to another, but we know where it's going to end. Okay. It says here, he said no action should damage Turkey's 1,000-year neighborly brotherly ties with Iran. So he's of the, the mindset or the side of we're not trying to be enemies of Iran, okay, which they're not, and they're not going to be. It doesn't matter what it looks like, but we know ultimately they're not going to be. Erdogan added that Ankara will continue taking additional measures after deploying 6 F-16 fighter jets to northern Cyprus on Monday. And the importance, right, about fully, understanding, but also believing in these prophecies is they can literally, somebody, right, this is very hypothetical. I'm just throwing out an example here, but to emphasize the point, somebody can launch a nuclear missile, okay, from foreign country, and it can hit parts of the U.S. If the MOTB has not come out yet, that's not going to lead to the ultimate destruction that we read of. It doesn't matter if the sirens are going off. It doesn't matter if you're getting a emergency broadcast system. 1 or 2 missiles have been shot off. That's not the ultimate destruction. The MOTB still has to come out first. That's what it means to go with what you know over what you see. Okay, prophecy will not lie. Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter, emphasizes that, right? It shall speak and shall not lie. So the just shall live by faith, or walk by faith, not by sight. You're going to see certain things, and it's going to, wow, that sounds just like this, or that looks just like this. But what is the order of prophecy, right? What do the scriptures say? What do we know that the Lord has already, showed us in the scriptures is going to happen? And once again, that's why I gave that example, right? It may seem like, well, damn, but that was a nuclear missile that was shot, and it hit the U.S. and they said that it came from this place. But if the MOTB hasn't come out yet and it hasn't been made mandatory yet, then that's going to be an event that brings about some chaos, but it's not going to be the final destruction, because prophecy still has not been fulfilled just yet. And that's why Yahushua said the end is not yet. And it's now more important than ever to watch very, very, very closely. Okay, because geopolitical events are very fluid. Okay, they're very fluid. Over the span of a week or even a day or 2 days, things can change drastically. So we have to constantly be watching. Now, I came here to bring up the point on Turkey, right? Which, if you know the breakdown of Ezekiel 38, pretty much preaching to the choir at this point. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but just the main points here, which what I want to do first is pull up a map. Let's see, Gomer and Togarma. Let me see if I can find a good one here. Okay, this is not bad. This is not bad. Let's just do this. Okay, so making sure this is visible. All right, so on this map, you can see here, right? This is an old map. Some older maps also, move, like it's the neighboring regions here are, pretty much the same. Okay, but some might place Gomer a little lower, right? Togarma a little higher, but it's all practically in the same region. So when you see in Ezekiel 38, Gog, right, the land of Magog, that's dealing with Russia, right, going up north to that territory today known as Russia. If I pull this up here, you can also see it. Russia's up here, okay, and you can see it labels them there Magog, right, but it's really Gog, the land of Magog. And going back here, so Togarma, Gomer, Meshech, and Tubal, these are the modern day areas of, what do we have here? Here next to it, you have Azerbaijan, Turkey, okay, Armenia. I think Armenia is north up here and here. So these are considered the north quarters, right? When you read in Ezekiel 38 and how they're going to come down, right? And I think whoever put this together, they did a pretty good job. But you see how the direction is all pointing downward. So that region of where you have Togarma and Gomer and so on, that's Turkey. Okay, it's a very big piece right there, but they're also gonna, be a part of the nations mentioned here in Ezekiel 38, right? So we know in verse 1 and 2, right, it's dealing with Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, but now coming down, right, goes into them being prepared, right? The Lord putting hooks into their jaws, basically turning them back into the mindset ready for war, to play the role that they have to play. right? Them preparing their armies and weapons and so on. And then it starts to list countries, right? Persia, right? Which we know, once again, that links up with the Carmanians in 2nd Esdras 15. Ethiopia, Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, right? So they're ready for war. And when you read in this chapter, you know that there's going to be a ground war as well, because it mentions the Russia coming, invading basically in the land of Israel. That's also in the 39th chapter in the first few verses. So at one point, shape or form, whether once again they try to come to some ceasefire, they try to calm it down or whatnot, it will spark back up again. And we told you this time and time again. They had months ago talks, right? They had talks after the 12-day war. Okay, and then it calmed down, and then they had and then you had well, what happened to this this thing escalating more and more? And we told you, don't fall for it. The talks are not going to work. And where are we today? So it doesn't matter how it looks. What matters is what's going to happen, and what's going to happen is what's written to happen, which is the words of the Lord, and it will not come back void. Okay, so it says here, right? Gomer and all his bands, the bands are going into their armies. The house of Togarmah, right? So that's and it's going to tell you that they're going to come with Russia, right? It says here, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and we just took a look at that that region, right, where you have Togarmah and Gomer. Okay, these are the north quarters, and they're going to come down along with Gog, which is Russia, as it says here, and all his bands, which is armies, and many people with thee. These are troops, all right? These are armies. Be thou prepared. This is speaking to Russia, right? Be prepared and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee. So Gomer, Togarmah, Persia, Libya, Ethiopia, and the other nations that aren't listed here that are going to be on that side, they're not going to be prepared to fight against Russia. They're going to be prepared or assembled onto them, as in being a united force. Like they're going to come along with them in terms of joining this war, or at least on what side of the war they're going to be. This isn't going to be like a three-pronged war. Okay, it says here, and be thou a guard unto them. That includes the nations we just read over here, right? Gomer, Togarmah, the north quarters, Persia, Ethiopia, Libya. So this tells us that when Russia comes down, because the Lord says he's going to bring them against his land, when he comes down, as it says, many days after many days shall thou be visited, which when you go into that word visited, it's basically the Lord reawakening that spirit in them to fulfill their role. Okay. We pull it up on here. Share this tab. The word visited, as you can see, says to attend to look after, to seek, to visit, to be sought for, okay, to be visited, to be appointed, because Russia has been appointed for a special role, right? To be made overseer. And after many years, meaning until the time when it's the Lord has deemed it necessary, which we're in that time now, for this prophecy to come to pass, they're going to be appointed for that role. Okay. And as it says, in the latter years, thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword. How are they going to come into the land? With their troops. They're going to actually come into the land. That's war. The Lord, when he said he's going to gather the nations, he meant that literally. That's why he gave a location. How is he going to gather the nations if nobody shows up over there? So there needs to be a vortex that draws them in. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that vortex. Okay. But the point of all this is to say that there's still more to go, right? There's still some more to go, and there's still more pieces that the Lord is working on and working with to put it into place. All right. And so we have to watch how this all plays out, but eventually it's going to form the picture in prophecy that we have been prophesying about for years. Eventually, when the puzzle is completed, that's what the picture is going to look like. When you're still filling in the puzzles and putting the pieces here, as you get, closer to the end of the puzzle, you start to kind of see the picture, but it isn't until the last piece is put in there that you're like, okay, boom. Now on the right side, it looked like it was the actual head, but really the head is on the left side, but you have to let the Lord put all the pieces of prophecy together so you can see the full picture. And that's when it's fulfilled. Okay. Let me see. Lastly, I did pull this up here. I just threw this in chat, chat GPT, just to see what it would say. Okay. So I just read this part real quick, right? I said here, based on 2nd Esdras 15, do the Carmanians and the dragons of Arabia end up joining forces? And it says here, yes, in the flow of prophecy in 2nd Esdras chapter 15, the Carmanians and the dragons of Arabia are portrayed as part of the same coalition moving together in judgment. Although the text does not explicitly say they formally make an alliance, instead, the passage describes them rising together and acting in the same campaign. So then it goes into 2nd Esdras 15, 29 to 32, right, that we read in the beginning of the lesson. So it says here, breakdown of what's happening. The dragons of Arabia, they represent the Arabian peoples or forces, often interpreted symbolically as fierce desert nations. They are described as coming with many chariots. Their movement spreads fear over the earth. They participate in the same military upheaval. Now, individually, they're not, just by themselves, they're not really that dangerous, but together, united, that's the problem. Okay, that's the problem. It says here, the Carmanians historically came from Carmania, a region in southern Persia. And remember, the Carmanians and the dragons of Arabia, the Carmanians are Elamites. Okay, the majority of those nations that form the dragons, they're Ishmaelites. These are different nationalities of people. Okay, it says here, a region in southern Persia or modern Iran. They are described as raging in wrath, charging like wild boars, fighting aggressively in the conflict. It says here, the joint campaign, the passage says, then says they fight and waste a part of the land of the Assyrians. Because the Arabian forces appear first, then the Carmanians join the battle. Both move against the same region. Now here, obviously it's thinking that Assyrians is talking about, the actual Assyrians in the land, like where Assyria had its land, but we know it's really referring to Babylon. It says here, most interpreters understand this as multiple Eastern nations joining the same war movement. So effectively, yes, they operate together in the same military invasion. Okay, so ultimately, right, we know that when it all comes down to it, going back to 2nd Esdras 15, going back to 2nd Esdras 15, right, and back to the question that was asked here, right, about how this relates to Saudi Arabia in the news. Right now, this, like I said, there's still a lot more that's yet to happen, that's going to ultimately lead to everything being in perfect place for this thing to go full force, right? The Lord is still arranging, and calling those nations, waking them up, and putting that spirit in them to be gathered and to be called to that region to for him to bring that judgment upon them. Okay, so we have to continue to watch, but things eventually, as they play out, you'll see how it makes sense and how the dragons of Arabia ultimately play into everything, and the Carmanians and the Syria and all of these things. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Hopefully that answered the brother's question, and Lord willing, that was edifying to those that were listening or those that will watch it afterwards. I'm gonna end it here. So I'm gonna give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakak Wadash. And until next time, Shalom.